We'll have more news later. Time now for the France 24 debate. Remember 8 years ago? That moment, it sank in, that 40 years after the assassination of Martin Luther King, the United States of America had elected a black president. Barack Obama never promised he'd eliminate racism overnight, but so many at the time believed that his election was a milestone on the road to a post-racial society. Were they right? Overnight in Charlotte, angry protesters blocking a major highway, 12 police injured after yet another shooting death of an African American amid contradictory claims of whether the victim posed a threat. We're going to look at events there and how they're perceived amid changing political winds in the United States. Donald Trump has tapped into the blowback against globalization with a strong accent on identity politics, promising to keep out Mexican immigrants and Muslims. More broadly, how are race relations in a campaign year unlike any other? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at race relations in the U.S. With us from Storrs, Connecticut, Gerald Horne, who teaches African American Studies at the University of Houston. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you for inviting me.
We're going to be joined by former New York City police officer Walter Yurkiv, author of When No One Was Watching. Here in the studio, former journalist Ricky Stevenson, who runs Black Paris Tours. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And welcome back to Charlotte Recoquillon of the French Institute of Geopolitics, who's looking at that dynamic between police and the African American community. The France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Several hundred protesters in the streets after the shooting death of 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott by an African American officer. Charlotte police claim they told him multiple times to drop his gun.
Traffic on a major interstate highway comes to a standstill in Charlotte early on Wednesday. Mounting lorries, blocking lanes and throwing rocks off an overpass onto traffic. Dozens of protesters clash with riot police in an explosive standoff over the fatal shooting of a black man by an officer a day earlier. Attempts to disperse crowds with tear gas backfired when the canisters were hurled back toward police lines. Some demonstrators were driven by a sense of injustice, others by fear.
And I'm a black guy, so when I see this, I'm thinking any given moment I get pulled over or stopped or a cop comes, it's likely I'm gonna get shot, armed or not. I'm gonna get shot. It's been growing. People getting shot everywhere, man. So if you're a black guy, you probably should be scared because we're the ones getting shot.
But it was the police who came under attack on Wednesday as protesters swarmed their cars. Around a dozen officers were injured, including one who was hit in the face with a rock. A local Walmart was overrun by looters and vandals. Protests broke out after 43-year-old Keith Lamont Scott was shot by a police officer who claimed he was armed and posed a threat. The unrest in Charlotte came just hours after a demonstration in Tulsa, Oklahoma, over the shooting of Terrence Crutcher. Hands in the air and unarmed, this police footage shows the moment before the 40-year-old black man was preemptively shot by a female officer, afraid he was reaching for a weapon. Both incidents are currently under investigation.
Yeah, we'll talk about the incident in Tulsa a little bit later on. But Gerald Horne, let me begin with you. You heard in that report a young African American saying that there's this feeling that more and more of us are getting shot. Is that the reality?
Certainly it's the reality. What's striking about the United States is that there are no official statistics with regard to police shootings. We've had to rely upon actually the Guardian of London, which has been keeping a running tally. But I think there's a larger question as well. You mentioned the presidential campaign of Donald J. Trump, who has been characterized by making these offensive comments about Mexicans, about Muslims. And recently he's been talking about how Black Americans are living in times worse than ever, which is quite striking because obviously he missed his high school classes on slavery and U.S. apartheid or Jim Crow. Just as Barack Obama's election was a reaction to the cowboy politics of George W. Bush, that is to say, electing the urbane, cosmopolitan Barack Obama, the rise of Donald J. Trump is a counter-reaction to the election of Barack Obama. That is to say, the right-wing, white identity politics, national chauvinist politics of Donald J. Trump.
This Wednesday, he's denounced the shooting in Tulsa, saying the officer choked and that they should bear the brunt of the law. So what do you make of that?
Well, it's striking that of late, Donald J. Trump has been campaigning in black churches, allegedly reaching out to the black community. But I agree with the mainstream U.S. press, which says that his alleged overtures to black Americans is actually an attempt to reassure white middle-class voters that he is not as big a racist as he appears to be.
All right, let's go over what happened, because we're in a situation, I'll turn to you, Charlotte Coquillon. We're in a situation where we have two versions, again, of what happened. In this case, there was no body cam for the shooting incident in Charlotte. Police coming out, the police chief in Charlotte coming out this Wednesday and saying, we told him several times to put down his weapon. Family says different story.
But asking this question is once again assuming that the blame can be put on the victim, and we have seen that repeatedly. That no matter what the victims of police shootings are doing, whether they are lawful, whether they are following the rules, the orders, whether they're not, they get shot when they're black. So the body cameras has certainly helped to raise awareness, but they are not the end of the process to get justice and to stop this violence. And also, I want to say that this repetition and this daily routine of seeing black people getting killed, like live and direct, is traumatizing for black people first, but also for the entire spectators. And I think this violence needs to be taken in consideration too.
All right, let me ask Walter Yurkiv, former New York City police officer who joins us from New York. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate. We see these incidents taking place. In your view, first of all, do you agree that they're taking place more and more, or are they more and more visible?
I think it's more and more visible. Social media has just made a worldwide effort to bring this to the news.
Brought it to the news, it has. In the particular case of what happened in Charlotte, because again, we have two different versions of what happened. The local African-American community doesn't trust the police version, and the police have a different story. What do you do in that situation?
Well, in the end, when there's an investigation, there has to be some sort of understanding on both parties that an end is not going to make everybody happy when the investigation is over, whether the police officer was in the wrong or whether the victim didn't comply. There's always going to be a discrepancy about a decision. Unfortunately, the public is not trusting the police. Therefore, they're not going to trust the district attorney's office. And whatever end result, if it's not in the public's favor, so to speak, is going to be more demonstration.
All right, the other incident, and we talked about it at the outset of this program last Friday, an unarmed African-American shot dead by an officer with another using a stun gun. It happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This incident was caught on the officer's body cams, and this time those cameras did work.
Well, fortunately,
I will just make this promise to you. We will achieve justice in this case. It will be presented to the right people. We asked the Justice Department in on it immediately through the U.S. Attorney's Office, Northern District of Oklahoma. I want to assure our community, and I want to assure all of you and people across the nation who are going to be looking at this, we will achieve justice, period.
Walter, it's early days, obviously, for both those investigations in Charlotte and in Tulsa. But let me just ask you bluntly, is it a case where officers are afraid of African Americans?
Generally, probably not. I'm sure there's specific police officers who may be, you're held accountable for everything you do when you're wearing a shield and a blue uniform and a gun. I could speak for myself. I was involved in 2 gunfights in Brooklyn many years ago. Fortunately, neither one of us were hit. We caught the perpetrators. Those are the 2 incidents I had. They fired upon me first. I didn't expect them to fire upon me. Did I have my gun out? No. But when I was fired upon, I fired. Police officer has a split second to make that decision. Whether they do that decision with a lot of thought or a reaction. They're all trained in the same type of police academy, but there's so many different personalities, so many different confidences in themselves and fears in themselves.
All right, you're saying they're all trained in the same police academies. Ricky Stevenson, we get the sense that the training isn't the same for all police officers in the United States.
We hear that the police should be trained to be more sensitive, to be more conscious, to do a better job of not racially profiling. But nobody has to teach them not to kill white people.
But
Wait a minute, let me make this point. A young man kills 9 people in a church in South Carolina. He's brought out, he's put in a bulletproof vest, he's taken to a hamburger place because he's hungry. Another man kills 29 people. He's brought out on a stretcher and he's taken to the hospital to be treated. They're white. What's the difference? Why is it that Tamar Rice, a young 12-year-old, is shot immediately? The officer can't even barely pull his car.
Is it mutual fear between?
How are you afraid of a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old? What is it? What is it? I think there has been such desensitization of Black Americans. I blame the media. I blame Donald Trump. I blame radio and television stations that really promote just the most negative. We're fighting against that. Black parents have to fight against the negativity that we see in television. In France, I fight against the negativity of the television series that are brought in from the United States. It's horrible.
How so? Explain this point, the negativity of the television series.
The television series that we see that are made in the United States are teaching people around the world to be afraid of Black people. When I first arrived here, that wasn't the case. And now you see more and more, just a little bit of hesitancy, a little bit of that kind of racist attitude. When you get the songs that we've fought to keep or to censor in the United States, unfortunately, many of them are made by young Black rappers, but they're paid an enormous amount of money to do only the negative, most negative songs and images about Black Americans. Is this all a part of it? I think so. But I still have to go back to nobody has to train police officers not to automatically kill white people. And yet they will see Black Americans, children, women, men, and just, it's like open season.
Gerald Horne, what's your experience on this? Is that mutual distrust and fear growing?
I'm afraid that it is. And in addition to the people Ricky Stevenson is blaming, I would also blame those in my profession, that is to say, the historians. The historians of the United States and the historians of the United States have not done a very good job of explaining the role of slavery in the founding of the United States of America and how darker-skinned people have been stigmatized. And that's become part of the political culture, and how darker-skinned people are seen as criminals and rebels. I find it striking that in the Charlotte incident, supposedly the man pulling the trigger, the police officer, was a Black person, which indicates that it goes beyond just white police officers and Black suspects, that it's a cultural, political, and historical phenomenon of deep roots. Chauvinism, I understand, is a word with French roots, but you would think that it was a word with U.S. roots, because national chauvinism prevents an honest discussion of the role of racism and slavery in creating the problems that are persisting today.
Charlotte Rocoguillon?
Yes, to follow up on this point, I think it's worth mentioning the book of Khalil Gibran Muhammad, a historian, who wrote The Condemnation of Blackness 5 years ago, I think, where he shows that we can trace the process of building this image of the black criminal back to the 19th century. And it's still the heritage of this tradition of assigning black people to crime and to violence. And so that's why I think, yes, police officers are afraid unconsciously of black people.
On that point, Charlotte, I spoke to an American sociologist who was here in France last year, and he was saying how he doesn't sense, of course, that with French people towards black people, but he does sense it with French people towards people of North African descent.
Yes, sure. We have the...
Is it the same?
Well, the historical contexts are different, and I'm not an expert on the French history, but we internalize the domination structures that we have been seeing over centuries. So making it about whether about the victim or the policeman, police officer, making it about individual stories and making it about the fact that we can fix individuals and people is not getting the real picture of what's happening.
All right, we're going to pick up on these points. When we come back, stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.